Well, what I want to start off with this morning, I don't know if it will be helpful to the kids that were up here, probably won't be helpful to their parents. Because waiting is hard, and waiting for Christmas is something I have pretty vivid memories about as a kid. Maybe it was because I was the youngest, maybe spoiled just a little bit. But it was so hard to wait for Christmas to actually open up gifts that I would go and look for them and see if I could find the hiding places where my mom had probably tucked them away and try to get to them before they got wrapped so that I would know what they were. And I was successful a few times. And one time I even found my sister's present, and I still remember blurting out what she was getting for Christmas. And in reflecting on this, I realized I never apologized to her for that. So I have some work to do when we get back together again. Waiting is hard, and that's what this is about in this passage from Jeremiah. But the kind of waiting that Jeremiah is talking about is different than that kind of waiting on a Christmas present or a family gathering or some kind of a family tradition that you're looking forward to, which in a sense just complements maybe a pretty comfortable life already. That's not the people that Jeremiah is speaking to when he gives God's proclamation that the days are surely coming. Now, there is a comparison to be made that, yes, it's sure. I mean, December 25th, Christmas is surely coming. You've got 23 days. And if you're not done shopping at that point, you'll have 24 if you can find a place that's open on Christmas Day. But it's coming. And there's some anticipation in that. Because you know that you can't rush it, just like you couldn't rush the sunrise or the sunset or the appearing of these stars that were in the children's story. But it's coming. And it involves a wait. The people that Jeremiah is writing to have lost their way of life. It's kind of hard to wrap my mind around that, what that would be like. Their world changed so drastically that I would imagine that it felt like, as one writer has said, the center broke. That you just can't make any sense out of what happened. That your entire rhythm of life was ripped away. You don't have your Lincoln Perk to go to in the morning or your Mojos. You don't have the family members maybe that just live across town to visit. You've been uprooted and taken into a whole nother country. They were taken out of Judah and were exiled to Babylon. That is really hard to imagine what that is like. So when Jeremiah brings this proclamation from God that the days are surely coming, I would think if I were them, I would be paying attention. I don't know if I would be kind of skeptical, like, really, this has gone on a long time. You really think these days are coming? If I'd be that way, but I would definitely be paying attention because you're talking about something that could possibly give me my life back again and my family's life back. What is this that's surely coming? N.T. Wright describes this in the book Simply Christian. Listen to this image. This is where the sermon title comes from. With Jesus, God's great rescue mission has been put into effect once and for all. A great door has been opened in the cosmos, which can never be shut. It's the door to the prison where we've been kept chained up, and we're offered freedom to experience God's resurrection for ourselves, to go through the open door and explore the new world to which we now have access. And in particular, we are all invited, summoned continually to discover through following Jesus that this new world is indeed a place of justice, spirituality, relationship, and beauty, and that we are not only to enjoy it as such, but to work at bringing it to birth on earth as in heaven, which we pray in the Lord's Prayer. He's talking about a hope that's out there that is sure, but it's not here yet, and that it's also something that we work for. And as one person has remarked, that this hope is not a mood. Hope is not a mood, but it's an action. Whatever we hope for, we will be prepared to work for. So let's look a little bit more about what is this that's going to change for Jeremiah's people. What is surely coming from Jeremiah 33? Just to take a look at this again, because it's not a very long passage. What's surely coming is that God is going to fulfill the gracious promise that God made to the house of Israel and to the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will make a righteous branch sprout from David's line. He will do what is just and right in the land. And in those days, Judah will be saved and Jerusalem will live in safety. And this is the name by which it will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. In order to try to understand this passage, we have to have some idea of what might be meant by righteousness. So you all have kind of a whiteboard in your mind. I can't see it, but you know it's there. I've got a whiteboard in my office. You have one in your mind. I want you to just start writing down on your whiteboard, how would you define righteous? What does it look like? How do you know when it's there? How do you know when it's absent? Just wonder what's going through your mind. Because for me, when I think about the word righteous, I go back to this song that I learned as a child. Be careful, little hands, what you do. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. So a lot of you, I see some nods, know that song. But there's definitely truth in that, right? There is. That's a form of righteousness or living in a right way, but it was often defined pretty much by you do what is right and you don't do what is wrong. We try to live out the 10 Commandments. Don't steal, don't kill, honor your father and mother. But the emphasis was just often on don't. And for me, it created a sense that all of the world out there is somehow evil, and I need to hold it at arm's length so that I don't get myself tempted or polluted by it. And it becomes a very individual focus and not one that takes into account how my neighbor is doing. This kind of righteousness that is mentioned here is a little bit bigger than that. It's a broader definition. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but I wonder how many hippies there are here this morning. Because this is one of the words for righteous that I thought about a little bit. I went to the Urban Dictionary to see, okay, how would the Urban Dictionary, our populace that feeds the Urban Dictionary these definitions of certain words, what would they put in as righteous? And I found that to be more helpful than actually a lot of the commentators that I was reading. Because the Urban Dictionary defines righteous as containing the best possible attributable qualities. Now, for those of you who are pretty young, and I asked a group I was with in a van last night, we went out for our staff dinner together, when was the word righteous used in our common speech? Maybe it never was in common speech. Well, when did the hippies use it? Because somebody had said, well, they think that's from the hippie generation. But the way that it would be used is if you went to your grandma's for dinner and you were served lasagna and you really liked it, you could say, Grandma, that lasagna was righteous. It doesn't get any better than that. That is what this is meaning. The righteousness is where there is justice and a putting things right for everyone in the land. And here's another aspect of this that I hadn't really noticed before. I always think of that phrase, the Lord our righteousness, as that's Jesus. Jesus is the one that exchanges his righteousness for my failings, my sin, that restores my relationship with God. But listen to the language. It says that Judah and Jerusalem, these are places, land, will live in safety. And the name by which it will be called, it's not talking about a person. It's talking about the land. The Lord is our righteousness, is a place. Now let me add a definition to you from one commentator that I did really like for what righteous or righteousness is. It's the right ordering of the world necessary for all of life to flourish. The right ordering of the world necessary for all of life to flourish. That's a pretty cool statement and a very high calling. That is what is surely coming. That is why there is reason to pay attention, to sit up and begin to think there's going to be a last day of this, and there's going to be a first day of that. That it's going to be a nodal event, that somehow one age will stop, a new age will begin, and yet at the same time, like N.T. Wright is saying, it's a now, not yet. We're not all the way there. Jesus came and gave us a model to follow, to show us what it means to live in a land that is just and right. And that's who we follow. It's who they were waiting for. And it's who we celebrate coming during our Christmas season. Because the righteousness Jeremiah is proclaiming is the right ordering of the world so that life will flourish. It's a place of safety, security, connection, belonging, that each person can become all that God has intended for them to be and living life to its fullest. And it also carries a meaning that there's justice. When I talk to you about my focus on, doing the right things, not doing the wrong things, that focus on right living, it loses sight of the communal nature of our sin when we miss the mark. That when I miss the mark, it affects other people. And it takes more than just me to work at putting things right, to make them as right as we can so that life can again flourish. In Jeremiah's world, they were very far from being able to help everyone flourish. The kings had become evil. They cared more about their own prosperity, as Jeremiah talks about in chapter 22. God says, "Woe to the kings who build palaces. They hire laborers, and then they don't pay them. They forget the poor and the needy, but instead they seek dishonest gain. They take advantage of people. They shed innocent blood. They oppress others, and they extort the weak to get something out of them, make it so they have no choice but to fall in line." And all the while, they would say, "We're God's people. No harm is going to come to us." God isn't going to do that to God's own people, and God has been warning them through Jeremiah that a judgment is going to come. If you don't turn away from these ways where you're always taking advantage of the weak and the vulnerable. And God took away their home. And it did break the very center of their lives. I don't know how many of you had seen this picture of a man in Syria, in Aleppo, when Aleppo was having its horrific war. And most every street, it seemed, at least in sections of the city, were bombed out. And he's sitting there on a bed, which is about the only thing in the room that seems to be in its place. Everything else is overturned. There's plaster on the floor. All the windows are broken. The frames of the windows are hanging in really weird angles. And you can see out the window and look down the street, and you can tell that basically house after house, apartment after apartment was in the same state. And he's sitting there on this bed with a phonograph beside him, playing a record and listening to whatever it was. That starts to capture a little bit for me what it feels like for people when the center breaks out of their lives, and how do you make order out of that kind of chaos. And it also shows how encouraging it could be, how enlivening it could be to have God say, The days are surely coming when that is not going to happen anymore. And there's going to be a land that is called the Lord is our righteousness. I haven't been around that kind of suffering. I've been around people who have been in that kind of suffering. And I'm just about positive there's people here who have been around it and have been in it and have seen it, where you have refugees. According to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, there's 68.5 million people that are displaced right now. We can't seem to get that number down. I had to update this number because when Luann had used that in another sermon 3 years ago, it was like, there's more refugees now than at any time in history. Well, now it's up about 3 million people. 25 million not only left their homes, but they had to flee their country. And over half of those are under the age of 18. 3 million people are seeking asylum because it's far too dangerous for them to return home, even though they'd love to put their life back together again. To hear the days are surely coming would be an encouragement when they could go back to peace and safety and without a sense of fear. If you can feel safe and secure in your own home on Christmas Day this year, think of the millions that long to have their homes back. We're among those. We have some among us who have been working with refugees. There's a Kansas State film that's being released this week on December 4th. Refuge in the Heartland, about refugees' experience. At least I don't know that much about this, but think that's what part of it is, the refugees' experience here in the plains. And I watched the trailer of this, and one of the shocking figures, when I really think about this kind of displacement, how many millions of people are refugees, one of the statistics that they gave in the trailer was less than 1% of refugees get a chance at a third country resettlement. Less than 1%. They're human beings that need to be loved and cared for like we do, and they want a home and a space to call their own. The psalmist in chapter 25 talks about how twisted, the word iniquity can have that meaning, how twisted our world gets because of our sin, our missing the mark, the way that we don't watch out for the weak and the vulnerable. But Psalm 25 is a plea for God to show us the way. Show us the way to that land where there is justice and there are things that are put right. The reality is that we live in a world where nothing stays one, and I mean W-O-N. We can win peace for a time, but it doesn't stay that way. It's like we're either moving toward peace or we're moving away from it. And the actions that you and I undertake every day, in every relationship that we have, the interactions that we have with the community and at the store, they all have a way of either leading us toward peace or away from it. Can you imagine driving through Kansas City on 435, which is the way we always end up coming because we're often going back to Ohio or Virginia, coming back through Kansas City on 435 as you get toward Overland Park and it says, "Welcome to Kansas." What if it would say, "Welcome to the Lord is our righteousness"? A place where we try to order everything so that all of life can flourish. We also kind of have a hang-up about security. And we're grappling with what that means in all kinds of ways. What kind of lives matter? Do black lives matter? Blue lives, white lives, brown lives? Republican lives, Democrat lives? Caravan lives? Immigrant lives, refugee lives, poor lives, rich lives. What kind of lives matter in this state that we might call the Lord as our righteousness? Everybody's longing for a door that's going to be set open for them when they have nowhere to go. They're looking for that place of entry, that place of hospitality, that place where they can maybe feel a sense of safety once again and not have to fear for their life or fear that their family's going to be torn apart. James says it this way: pure religion and undefiled before God is to honor the widows and the fatherless in their affliction. Those were the most vulnerable and the weak in James's culture. Who are the most vulnerable and the most powerless among us? Who is it that we need to be considering as those who need somebody to be with them in that vulnerability, in their affliction? And on a global scale, ever since 9/11, America, for the first time in many years, felt insecure because there was violence on our own soil. We even established a Department of Homeland Security. But security is more than the absence of violence. And here's another thing for your whiteboard. What do you need to feel secure? It's more than just not being under threat by some foreign ideology. And one thing that we forget is that I can never be more secure than my neighbor. We're never going to be more secure than those around us. We have to be able to care for those next to us, and if they're able to have their needs met. So that they can have some sense of peace too. How can we do that in this season? Get to know our neighbors, to know what they need, to know how they might be helped. And perhaps even a more basic question is, do I even know who my neighbors are? The door set open before us is the promise that someday the kingdom is going to come in its fullness. We're going to live in a land that's called the Lord is our righteousness, but right now we're in the not yet. Jesus is the model. He's the righteous branch, the one to pattern our lives after. If we want to see what it looks like where this kingdom is here, how did he put things right so that each life could flourish around him? And we can join that work. We can be a part of making this land or this community a place that carries that name. Where we could say, welcome to the Lord is our righteousness, where everything is being ordered so that all life will flourish. Oh, I long for that to be the focus of my own family, that would be its reality, of Heston Mennonite, of Harvey County, of the state of Kansas, of the U.S., and beyond. That we could bring a message of salvation and safety so that all of life may flourish. Now that would be righteous.